Hello and welcome to the Middle Cross Moments podcast. I am your host, Tyler Hoffland, and today I am joined by Eddie Cullum. Eddie takes me through his story of struggle all the way through what he's doing today in his life. And let me tell you, it is pretty incredible to think of all the things that happened to him 4 or 5 years ago to today. Eddie talks about how he was struggling with alcoholism, really not living a life that God would want for him, and all the way to where he is sober for 3.5 years, getting ready to run the New York City Marathon, just ran with the Bulls in Barcelona, Spain, jumping off cliffs, doing all kinds of things, and living his life to the fullest and in a way that God wants him to live. What's really incredible, I think, is how Eddie talks to us about how the moments during his struggle where he was resentful actually became a time that he's now grateful for. So check this out. I think this is a great episode. There's a lot of little bits in here that are really helpful if you're thinking about how to think through redemption and recovery and addiction and how you can help others and things like that. So check out today's episode with Eddie Cullum on the Middle Cross Moments podcast, beginning right now. So welcome to the show, Eddie.
Yeah, Tyler. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, very grateful to be here today.
Eddie, you had a bit of a challenge. So if I can characterize the Eddie that I knew back, several years ago now, always very energetic, always, kind of living the high life, if you will, at least from an outsider's point of view. But things kind of turned dark for you. And can you walk me through what happened?
Yeah. I through my 20s I was the party guy. I was checking all the boxes and doing all the right things, but what I didn't really understand or want to realize about myself is that I'm an alcoholic. And what happened to me is in my late 20s and early 30s, the alcoholism really took over, right? It started to be the alcohol and some drug use started to be the number one things, the number one focus in my life. And it ultimately um ended a long-term relationship, which and a marriage. And it was I found myself with multiple DUIs, charges, the loss of a job, my career looking like it's spiraling down and never coming back. And I was pretty lost and broken, and by the time I was in my early 30s. And I um there was definitely a need for a change.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed a lot of times people have a hard time admitting that, when they're in that spot, they, a couple things. I feel like they maybe think they've got it handled, or maybe that it's not as bad as it is. And sometimes I think that's felt more by our loved ones than it is, actually by ourselves personally. But how did you navigate like through that and maybe you weren't there, but of recognition of a problem, I guess.
Yeah, there was a lot of denial, right? The first person that really came to me and told me I had an issue was my wife at the time, my ex-wife now. And she told me, that something needed to change. My alcohol consumption and, my partying had really ramped up. And, a lot of it, started, around COVID time, right? When I had been traveling for work. And, I'd always been a heavy drinker. And, and now looking back, knowing what I know, always been an alcoholic. But there was, an environmental change that happened, after I got married, and then COVID. And so she approached me, saying that I needed to make a change. And, before that happened, even though there was multiple hospital visits, some detoxes, and it was all kept within kind of, the confines of our home, right? And so she was taking the front end, the brunt of it all. And I ultimately made a couple of not great attempts at some recovery, some treatments before I got divorced, but didn't think I had a problem. I thought that it was everybody else's problem, right? It was always pointing the finger at other people, minimizing my situation, and really just not wanting to admit that I was an alcoholic, and because my whole life revolved around alcohol, and it was that became essentially my higher power, and it was the most important thing to me was being able to drink and use and party, and change the way that I was thinking, and ultimately ended up uh, getting divorced. And it took a lot of consequences. It took a lot of what I call rock bottoms, right? But the real true rock bottom for an addict is death, right? And an alcoholic. And so, like, I'm so grateful that that I found what on paper now is my rock bottom, to be able to make a change. And that was after a couple of failed treatments, and ending up um about 1,000 miles away from home. I tried a geographic relocation to Chicago after a treatment, and I had relapsed again, and I was on a deflated air mattress, and with drinking a bottle of vodka a day. And I just realized that this is, what am I doing? Just a year prior to that, I was married. I had a house, a wife, a dog, and a career. And I everything had just basically collapsed on me, all because of um, my alcoholism, and ultimately straying away from the church and Jesus, and my higher power, my true higher power, which is God. And that I just felt so alone. And so that I realized, like, I needed to make a change. And I made when I was on my way to my last treatment before I got sober, I made a promise with myself, like, there's no reservations, right? I'm giving my life over to the care of God as I understand him, which is Jesus Christ, and to not have any kind of reservations on ever drinking or using again.
Yeah, you mentioned the higher power and being a follower of Jesus. Were you always a follower of Jesus and just kind of fell away from that, or
So
um
yeah, yeah, I grew up in the church. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I still yeah, am a Catholic. But yeah, there was a period in my 20s where I thought I was the end all be all, right? I thought, and it was all, everything I did was because of me, or because I did it, and it was all my own doing, right? And my dad and my mother and father are very and they're very, they would always humble me, right? And they'd say, um, all glory be to God. And if I would start talking like that, but I would brush it off, and it was in the back of my mind thinking I'm the reason these things are happening. And I remember, right before things took a turn for the absolute worst in my addiction, I was thinking, yeah, ultimately I am the reason that everything is happening. There was some good things happening, like whether I got a promotion, or whether, whatever was happening in my life, it was all because of me. But then I remember thinking about that and realize, and that's a very, very scary place to be. That is the ultimate, like, when there's, you don't have that foundation, and that, the trust and love of, God, and in your life. And it's super lonely and super scary.
yeah, I completely agree. And I think, as being Catholic again, I've mentioned that on the show before too. I think one of especially for people that grew up Catholic,
Hmm.
and probably in our era more so, but I think people don't really understand what that means to give yourself to God and to be followers of Jesus. You
Hmm.
grow, you take the Eucharist, you do all those things, but you don't really understand the implications that you are committing to. And I was the same way in a lot of cases. I had a business that was successful and things like that. And I believed it was all because of what I did.
Hmm.
Everything was mine. Um, when none of it was. None of it matters, right? Like
Hmm.
it doesn't matter because someday we cease to exist and we go on to live in an eternity with Jesus Christ, and that is what matters. But none of the I's matter. Still today, I want a promotion. I want to do this job. I want to go do this thing over there. None of that. It's all I talking
Hmm.
again. It's not. None of that really matters. Um, to really the actual calling we have, which is to live for and because of Jesus Christ. And I hear you say and talk about some of your struggles with that. How have you um some of those moments maybe within there where you mentioned you were sleeping on a deflated air mattress in Chicago. How'd you find yourself in those situations? Like, how do you end up? I'm not going through like the day, and I'm just all of a sudden in this
Yeah.
spot doing the thing. Like, how
It's
does someone find themselves there?
it's repeated actions and decisions day in and day out, right? And that's how I live my life now is in good decisions, right? And a routine and, prayer and meditation. But what happened is I was, I ended up in a treatment out in Minnesota. I was at Hazel and Betty Ford Clinic, and that's ultimately where I got sober as well. But I met someone at treatment, and and this is was kind of a theme for me too, is that person, that woman that I met became my higher power, right? Like my whole sobriety, my whole life, whatever I was doing, was dependent on that relationship. And she was from Chicago. I decided that I was gonna pack up everything and move to Chicago. I'd already sold my house in Bismarck. I was divorced. I was, sober, and we are going to live happily ever after. So, did what normal people do, right? Is go get matching tattoos, move to Chicago,
Yeah.
things like that. Like happy, get an apartment. And yeah, but it was the relationship, was not a strong one. And it was, and my sobriety wasn't in a good place. So ultimately, I ended up breaking up, and I was in that apartment on this deflated air mattress and struggling for months. And then she ultimately ended up making a phone call to my dad, and my dad came from North Dakota, flew to Chicago, and then we got all my stuff packed up and got a rental and took it back. And yeah, it was, yeah, so that's how I ended up in Chicago. But that what and I realized things too, like, what she did, I was resentful for of at the time, like, "Oh, you called my dad, and, like, why'd you have to do that on me? I'm fine." But, now it's one of the things I'm most grateful for. And, honestly, and my ex-wife as well, I'm so grateful that, she decided that she took action. I mean, she had to leave the situation. If people would have kept enabling me, and, I don't know if I would have found my solution, in fast
Yeah.
enough, right? So I'm grateful for the things that I used to be resentful over, and I try not to hold on to resentments as I do. I work a 12-step program within, Alcoholics Anonymous, and, I sponsor men in the program. And, the things I pray for daily too is, it's a part of the step work is resentments and not holding on to resentments. And, if I can be free of those, I can live a much more peaceful life.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's awesome that you are grateful for looking back, like your ex-wife and your father and your and the girlfriend with the matching tattoo. Do you still have matching tattoos, or did you still
Yeah,
got the same
so
one?
I
Yeah.
still I
Okay.
have mine, but she covered hers up. But
She
because
did.
I
Okay.
did make an amends to her. That's part of the step work too, is the 9-step amends I made. And she mentioned that hers was covered up, but that's probably on the to-do list for me to do, get mine
Sure.
covered up.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, yeah,
So I don't know. It's a
and I
part of
think
the story though too,
I think
a
it's
part of me.
pretty
I mean, yeah, it's like a little
right.
half heart puzzle
Yeah, I
piece.
mean, and it's cool. I'm not going to ask any more details about it. um, But I mean, I think it's cool that you that you embrace her, and that, and like, yeah, you really caused problems for me in that moment. Like, she told on
Hmm.
you essentially, but you aren't probably sitting on this podcast today without any of those things that happened along the
Hmm.
way. Who knows where you're at and what you're doing, but likely not to be here. Um,
Right.
so although, and all of those things are really like God's little mustard seeds being planted, and Him not leaving you, even though it's a challenge and you're struggling and you're probably wondering, why, God, where are you? Why am I doing this? Why are you not helping me? Things like that. When really He's with you the whole time, and
Yeah.
He's planting those seeds in your life to make,
Hmm.
to ultimately build you into who you are today. Um, which, let's talk about who you are today. So, last week, I happened to be scrolling through Facebook, and your post comes up about you running with the bulls in Spain. And so I'm like, what is he doing? And because I've watched it before, but I haven't actually uh obviously done it. I don't plan to either. I would be one of the guys that you are jumping over. Um, but take me through this. What is, I mean, for those that don't know, what is running with the bulls, and what were you doing there?
Yeah, so I've always kind of been an adrenaline junkie, through my whole life, right? And in sobriety, it's gotten to another level almost too. But I'm doing it. It's a lot safer now that I'm sober. We're doing these things, but so yeah, it was kind of on my list of things that I wanted to do. I had some cousins that did it, about 7, 8 years ago, and I wasn't able to go. And so yeah, I had one other buddy who I actually met in treatment, and he just celebrated a year of sobriety. And we wanted to do a trip and wanted to do something, that was kind of dangerous, right? And now it's kind of a theme for me when I go on vacation. If I'm not doing something that's a semi-risky my life or dangerous, I mean that's just a part of the agenda now. But at the same time, so yeah, we bought tickets and we flew into Madrid and we drove up to Pamplona, and yeah, we ran with the bulls on the first day of the festival. And there's 3,000 people in the street, and there's no waivers. There's no there's no, like, really, I mean, there's police there, but you're just all packed like sardines in this street. And then there's 6 bulls they let out, and they shoot a firework to let you know that they're let out, and they shoot another firework to let you know that they're coming around the corner, and there they are. And you run through the streets, and then once you get to you run. It's about a half-mile course. It takes about 2.5 to 3 minutes for everybody to finish this. Everybody's sprinting, and like I mentioned, there's bodies I'm jumping over. People, I mean, people get injured, and nobody died, thankfully, this year, but it's a possibility, right? Like, because there's so many people. And but anyway, you get into this arena, and then all the bulls like are shoot into the chute, and then they start letting the bulls back out. You think you're done, and there's like thousands of people in this arena that are there watching this. We're the entertainment. We're the matadors at this point, and they let the bulls back out one by one, and they're chasing us all around the arena. And yeah, people are getting flipped, and you're running for your life. And I had a hip replacement in January, and I had to test that out pretty good. I still got some side to side motion, but
Yeah, yeah. So
but yeah, it was
did you
intense.
have any close encounters in that, or were you able to kind of maneuver yourself around them
Th-
pretty well?
Yeah,
Or
there was the bull. Yeah, the bulls were probably about this far, maybe about a little less than a foot away from me when they ran in the street. So
okay,
like I had to be super close to the wall. That was about as close. And then they were running right at me when I was in the arena too. But there was other people around me, so I had to turn around. And I actually I was on a video clip that made ESPN Sports Center Instagram. So there's one of my buddies was watching it, and so I played sports my whole life, and it took running with the
yeah,
Bulls to make Sports Center.
yeah. No, that's really cool. Do you think, like through maybe some of the highs and stuff that you received through alcohol and drugs that you have like just changed some of that, and now it's like through thrill seeking kind of.
Yeah, some of it, and it's not uncommon for addicts or and alcoholics to have some thrill-seeking behavior. Honestly, it's almost like in our nature to seek some sort of dopamine rush, right? Or like a natural high like that. But at the same time, I do keep myself mindful of like anything that is gonna resemble maybe alcoholic behavior or addict behavior, right? So things like that are safe, but
Yeah,
there's other things that crop up in my life that, I just got to make sure that I'm not acting alcoholically or addictly towards something else I'm trying to
sure.
replace with something that's not. And that's where it comes back to the higher power. That's where it comes back to God, right? In my life is making that the focal point. And any kind of void that I have, I fill with God.
Yeah, certainly. So you're into like cliff jumping. I saw you doing some cliff jumping.
Yeah.
You've climbed some mountains. You're still like a marathon runner? I know you're doing the Eddie's raising money for the Betty Ford Foundation right now. For a marathon you're running in New York City. Is that where? Or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, I'm raising money for the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, patient aid scholarships. I'm running the New York full marathon, New York City full marathon in November, and so yeah, I'm raising money for that. So I get to see the benefits of those patient aid scholarships because I do sponsor men in the program, and I do speak out at Hazel and Betty Ford once a month, either at the Center City location or their location in St. Paul. And so I'm able to see the benefits of what those scholarships will entail.
I think so. So you sponsor people in that as well, and help them through
Yeah,
recovery.
yeah.
Okay.
So I sponsor men in Alcoholics Anonymous, and you lead them through the 12 steps of the Big Book, um and make and so I get to see a lot of the guys I sponsor and the people that are in my life. I've gone through the Hazelden and Betty Ford program, so I get to see the benefits of those scholarships that help people go to treatment there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an awesome. What a way to give back for you to that foundation um the stuff that you it was able to change your life and things like that. What do you have up? What's on the list next?
Yeah, so I was chatting a little bit about recently. I had done some bungee jumping and some rock climbing out in Moab, Utah. But what's next is I saw, and I was talking to my cousin who's kind of, he's also he's in recovery as well. So he likes similar things, but we're gonna do some wing walking. It's when you get up in the airplane and you stand up on top of the wings, and then you hang on the bottom of it too, like while it's in the air. It's like
Okay.
they've been doing, yeah, so they do it in Southern California at this place we are checking out. So that's next on my list of adventures.
How high is the airplane? How high
You
are we
know,
talking? I'll do it on the
there
ground. If the airplane's on the
yeah,
ground, I will gladly walk on the wings.
Yeah, it's up there. I mean, I don't know if it's quite, 20,000, but it's like
Oh
flying
man.
altitude. Yeah, you're up there. You're tethered off, and you take like a 5-hour class, like a 5-hour course to be able to do this. So then once you're up there, you're tethered off and you climb up on the top and you stand on the top of the wings, and you can go be like buckled in, and you can ride on the underneath the plane and like outside on the one of the wings. And
That's insane. That is
so,
that's insane.
so yeah, that's
Okay.
that's what's
you,
next for
you
me.
keep us up to date on what that looks like.
Yeah, I'll make sure I send you some
I
pictures.
Yeah, please do. I've not heard of that, but that sounds like a ludicrous idea. Yeah,
It looks safe.
yeah, no, I think it'll be great. I think it'll be great. Good luck.
Thanks.
Uh, awesome. Well, Eddie, I've appreciated my time with you today. I think this is I'm blessed to have you involved in our mission, and which we'll have a maybe more of a formal announcement on that soon as well. But if before we go, I always ask people as we wrap up the podcast, what advice would you give for people that were maybe in your shoes?
Yeah, if I was to, to give any advice or, suggestions would be to, um, I always thought that, sobriety was going to be scary, right? Because I was full of fear myself. Everything scared me. And, when I thought that it was giving me all this courage, it actually, it was just fear inside me, right? And the lack of of trust in God and Jesus in my life. And so I would say, if you're struggling, really just if you have any, resources, just listen to, the professionals and take the suggestions. It's all talk about a lot about willingness, right? There's, the willingness to take the suggestions and accept the help. There are resources out there, and it's, there's, even, many in Bismarck, Mandan. It's close to my heart, right? Back in North Dakota, and I ultimately live in the Twin Cities now, but um yeah, and, getting involved and just going to a meeting and then obviously, connecting with your higher power and, with God and really just, and that's what keeps me sober today is right is meditation and prayer and fellowship, and then, being of service to others, right? Service work and getting outside of myself, and everything else seems to really kind of align if I take care of those things.
That's incredible. I feel inspired to have heard your story today. I am so blessed that we were able to bring this together and talk to our listeners and the people that support the Middle Cross mission with some of the hope that you can help bring to them. And I really wish you a mountain of blessings and grace and luck and all of those things as you continue your journey, and being the best person you can be for God. And that's an incredible story. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Yeah, I'm very grateful to be here on the Middle Cross Moments podcast. Thank you so much. And yeah, God bless you as well.
Hey, quick shout out to one of our sponsors. If you're thinking about buying a home, refinancing, or just want to understand your options, reach out to Dylan Newberger with Loan Depot, located in Minot, North Dakota. Dylan makes the process simple, clear, and built around you. No pressure, just real answers. Call or text him directly, and I'll drop his info in the show notes. Take that first step and see what's possible today. Hey, quick word from one of our sponsors. If your business needs custom metal fabrication done right, check out Metal Masters of Wisconsin. Specializing in stainless steel and also experts with carbon steel and aluminum. They handle small to large projects from prototype to production. They take pride in doing a good job with integrity, craftsmanship, and a commitment to something bigger than just the bottom line. If you need precision you can trust, connect with Metal Masters of Wisconsin. I'll drop their info in the show notes.